Welcome back, Jet Press. My name is Mike Luciano, and we have a very special guest with us today. It is Ian O'Connor, four-time New York Times bestselling author, of course, of the book Belichick, a very in-depth biography of New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick, and he is back with, I would say, probably the first issue of the Jet Press book club, Out of the Darkness, a biography of Aaron Rodgers, the Mystery of Aaron Rodgers. You can get it through Mariner Books, and having tucked into it a little bit. It is very in-depth, as in-depth as you're going to get on Aaron Rodgers. So, Ian, thank you for taking the time to join the show today.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. I appreciate it.
Fellow Marist College alum, so that's obviously his
Absolutely.
biggest claim to fame here. So, let's just dive right into it because Rodgers has always, even when he was with Green Bay, kind of mystified me. Like, if you were to create a word cloud, I think of words used to describe Aaron Rodgers, you get a lot of prickly, weird, passive aggressive, things like that. Things that normally aren't applied to all-time great players or franchise quarterbacks, I should say, because you got to have this sort of look about you. Based off your interviews and talking with him, how accurate do you think that public portrayal is with the guy that you got to know?
It's accurate. He's a contrarian. He is a rebel, sometimes with a cause, sometimes without a cause. I think that the one thing about him, Mike, that's always struck me is he is fearless. He's fearless in his positions, in speaking publicly about those positions, however unpopular they may be. And not many people are like that. He's wired a different way. And there is something commendable about that trait. And he doesn't back down. Now, he's gotten himself in trouble. Some of his wounds have been self-inflicted. But I do actually appreciate that about him. And in researching this book, the one thing that really struck me was people forget that he was considered one of the good guys in sports before COVID. Pre-COVID, he supported Colin Kaepernick and the right for athletes to kneel during the anthem in protest of inequities in American society. He spoke out against a fan who yelled out an anti-Muslim slur in the national anthem one game and was thanked by President Obama for doing that. And all of a sudden, he turned into a villain with four words in August of 2021 when he was asked if he was vaccinated. He said, "Yeah, I've been immunized," and that did not turn out to be the case. And yeah, his life dramatically changed forevermore with those four words.
Looking back at Rodgers too, because he really has, I think, kind of leaned into the persona a little bit. I guess, looking from 100 feet away, it seems like, well, if that's what people think of me, then fine. And it seems like that's sort of that defiance you're speaking to, where it doesn't really, for lack of better words, give a damn kind of what people think. One area that you really touch on a lot, and I really was one of my favorite parts of the book, having flipped through it, was a lot of stuff about his family. Because even before the immunized comment, there was a lot of who's he dating, what's going on with his family, why doesn't he talk to his family, stuff that not necessarily doesn't make you a bad person, but at least was seen as odd. Now, I don't think it necessarily impacted his play on the field from a statistical point of view because he was always Aaron Rodgers throughout all that. But did you ever detect there was some spillage where some of the personal drama maybe bled over into his professional life, maybe in the locker room or in dealing with Mike McCarthy or things like that?
It's a great question, Mike. And I think that he did accumulate a lot of scar tissue over the years because I go back and look at tape of him as a young player, and he won four of his first five postseason games, including the Super Bowl as MVP of that game, of course. And he did play fearlessly. Now, I just told you that off the field, I think he's been fearless. On the field, a little less so in recent years. And I think in the playoffs anyway, there seems to be more of a conservative approach with him. And this is more of an educated guess after the research I did into his life and career, is that I think the accumulation of scar tissue, not only the postseason losses in recent years or post Super Bowl anyway, along with some of the controversies off the field and the criticism that he's taken, that he is human. I mean, that has to affect you to some degree. And he, like you said earlier, that persona of I don't give a damn, yeah, that's there. But beneath that, some of these wounds have to have made a lasting mark on him. And I think you combine some of these bitter defeats in the playoffs with those hits that he's taken, some of them, again, were self inflicted. I do think there's some scar tissue there that he'd have to break through to win a championship in New York. So it'll be fascinating to see how he ends his career on the field. I do think if he can get that second ring like Peyton Manning did at the end of his career, like John Elway got his two at the end of his career, it really changed their legacies. And I think the same would happen for Aaron Rodgers.
Otherwise, he's trending towards that Drew Brees area where no one's going to doubt Drew Brees as a football player, but a common theme seems to be, well, he left a lot of meat on the bone. And I think even Rodgers supporters will say, looking back on Green Bay, especially some of those, 15-1, 13-3 teams, that he did kind of leave a lot of meat on the bone. Maybe it was being overly conservative, maybe it was something else, but it's definitely part of the Rodgers mythos at this point. I want to get back to the end of Green Bay really quick
Hmm?
because that was probably the most public spillage in terms of we finally found out what was going on behind the scenes between him and Mike McCarthy. And as you've alluded to in the book, and there has been other reports out there, it got really tense at the end. There was obviously the one from Tyler Dunn where he seemingly hinted Mike McCarthy was not very smart and that he could kind of run the offense himself, run the team himself, for lack of a better phrasing. Kind of take us on a little bit of a deep dive into what exactly went wrong, because it seemed for a while that things were going pretty well. They were winning games, they won a Super Bowl, and then really almost overnight, it just completely blew up in everybody's face.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like the same thing happened to him that happened to Brett Favre to the benefit of Aaron Rodgers back in 2007, going into the 2008 season when Favre wanted to come back and Rodgers was in place, ready to go, and really the organization had moved on from Favre after losing the NFC Championship game to the Giants, and wanted to start anew with Aaron Rodgers. And I think they had Jordan Love in place. He was ticked off, just like Brett Favre was when they drafted Aaron Rodgers. But in this case, the Packers actually moved up to take Aaron's replacement, where Aaron fell into their laps in the 2005 draft. He was supposed to go number one. He ends up going number 24. They actually traded up to get Jordan Love. So I think that clearly was the beginning of the end. Obviously, he had a dispute with management over lack of say in personnel decisions. Why does Tom Brady? Well, I don't know if Tom Brady had a whole lot of say in New England, as it turned out. He did have a lot of say in Tampa Bay, but Aaron saw other superstars in other sports who seemed to be given a lot of influence in personnel decisions, and he wanted that, and that really wasn't the Packer way. They ended up giving him a little of that, but not much. And I think who knows what would have happened had he played that final season in Green Bay healthy, because obviously he had the two MVP seasons with LaFleur, and then they missed the playoffs, lose to the Lions at the end of that season. And I think everybody realized then it was time to part ways. But had he been healthy without the thumb injury really impacting that season, we might have had a different outcome there. But I think he saw a great opportunity in the New York Jets, a Charlie Brown franchise. If I can go to New York City and win a championship with a team that hasn't been in the Super Bowl since January of 1969, that is going to do a tremendous amount for my legacy. And I think that's why he pushed for the trade.
I want to follow up on that because whenever you hear Rodgers talk about the trade in an interview or a podcast, wherever he chooses to bloviate Pat McAfee, wherever it may be, he'll always talk about Robert Saleh and the roster around him and this great opportunity. Do you think that there was a part of him that said, well, there are other teams with good rosters who need quarterbacks, but if I go to the dopey Jets and turn them around, number one, they're going to give me power because they're the Jets and they haven't had a guy like me in decades. Do you think that was it? Like, was it just totally where I can get the most power and the most influence over where maybe is the better team?
I would say, Mike, all of the above. And going from the smallest market to the biggest market had appealed to him. And yeah, just great opportunity there because the Jets have been the Jets for so long. Haven't been in the playoffs since what, 2010, haven't won it all since January of 1969. And so, yeah, he knew coming in, he was going to have Hackett there as an offensive coordinator. That meant that Aaron basically was the offensive coordinator and a defensive minded head coach who was going to give a lot of influence to Aaron Rodgers, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. So he was going to be loved again, too. And I think he was feeling that wasn't necessarily the case anymore in Green Bay. And I think it was time for everyone. That was the perfect time to part ways for both franchise and player. And really, it followed the Brady model. Brady went to a loserville franchise, if you will, and right away won it all. That was the plan with Aaron Rodgers until 4 snaps into the opening game. And being in that building, was really a heartbreaking thing to see. But now he gets a mulligan, and let's see what he does with it.
People always go 4 snaps, but I remember watching that game and I missed the first 2 snaps. So I only got to see 2 snaps of Aaron Rodgers
That hurts.
before we know what happens. I could not believe that. I want to get back to the Achilles thing because I've never heard of an Achilles injury or recovery quite like this. I mean, Achilles injuries used to be, is the guy ever going to play again? I mean, even as recently as like 10, 20 years ago, you popped an Achilles, it was like, oh, that guy's done. It was pretty much unspoken. Rodgers not only recovers pretty well, but he's talking about I might play in week 13 or 14 if we're in the postseason. And some people were believing it because of this whole speed bridge thing, and then some people are going, it's a bunch of hogwash, just trying to keep his name in the media cycle as he likes to do. Take us down that whole road of what exactly went down during that Achilles recovery. Like, was it all fanciful? Was it just trying to keep his name out there? Or was there really a chance that he could somehow recover and play in week 15 or 16 if the Jets were in it?
No, I think there was a chance. And his trainer wanted him to hold off and wait until the 2024 season. And his trainer was concerned, you rush it back, you tear it again, and it's over. You can't go through this again, this rehab and surgery and everything else. So now Aaron, initially there were some very grim moments in the early stages of his rehab where he wondered if the Jets even wanted him back, if he was done. It got dark, and basically he overcame that, and with an incredible amount of therapy of different kinds. And of course, he had the stem cells, and he got to a point where he was pretty confident he was going to play at the end of the year. Now, the Jets had to stay in it, and he told his trainer that if we win on December 17th at Miami, I'm playing on Christmas Eve against Washington. And that was the end of the conversation. Well, of course, the Jets lost, I think, 30-0 in that game in Miami, so it didn't matter.
Pick six on a
But
Hail Mary.
yeah, right. So I think that he was really hell bent on playing, and it was real. It wasn't a publicity stunt. He wanted to pull off the greatest comeback in NFL history from a medical standpoint, and it just didn't work out. So again, this is a do-over for him, a mulligan, and everything is back in place just like it was last summer, last August in the preseason. The difference is the Jets are actually a little bit better. Their roster is a little better. Obviously, the offensive line and other components of the team on both sides of the ball are better. And the question now is, can you keep him healthy, Aaron, for 14 or 15 starts? Taylor can handle the other 2 or 3, and then have him be healthy for the playoffs at the end of the year.
Talking with Ian O'Connor, author of Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers from Mariner Books. You can go and get it wherever books are sold. Now, a couple more questions for you. Looking just as a Jets fan and speaking to the parade of Jets fans that are out there, knowing what you know about Rodgers and his recovery and where he's at mentally, which is probably a bigger question mark and X factor in his success than it is for most quarterbacks and most elite quarterbacks at this age, his mental status, for lack of a better term. Should Jets fans feel more hopeful or concerned with Rodgers at the helm this year? Because he's going to be better just blanket wise than most of their other quarterbacks. But should they actually feel like this year he can get it done? He's in a good place mentally and physically.
More hopeful, Mike, than concerned. I think there needs to be some concern there because of his age. He'll be 41 in December, and just based on what they witnessed last year, that they feel like they're gun shy, and I understand that. But I do think the football gods owe the Jets one this year, and obviously the NFL and TV executives are gambling on that, given their amount of national TV and standalone games. So I have a feeling, and it's just a gut feeling, and certainly mine have been wrong before, but I do think the Jets and Rodgers will have a fairly big year. I think they'll make the playoffs. What happens from there, who knows? But yeah, I just think after the horrors of what they endured last year, they're owed one. And I think Jets fans, they can't go through something like that again. So I think they should be hopeful that the Jets, yeah, listen, win the AFC East. They don't talk about that enough. They haven't done that since 2002, and that was a tiebreaker at 9-7 with the Patriots. They haven't won it outright since Bill Parcells was the coach in 1998. They should really talk about that more instead of talking about the Super Bowl. Let's just win the AFC East and take it from there.
The Baltimore Colts, or the Colts rather, because they used to be the Baltimore Colts in the AFC East, have more AFC East division titles than the New York Jets, which that's a sobering stat for you. So,
It sure is.
one last question. Did you come away from this whole exercise kind of impressed by Rodgers or more concerned about Rodgers or with more questions than answers? Like, from what you thought about him before you started this to now, how has your opinion kind of shifted?
That's a very good question. I think that I have a better sense of who he is certainly now after doing 250 interviews, including one with him at his home in Malibu. That I think deep down there is a good person there. I think again he's been reckless at times with his remarks publicly. That's gotten him in trouble, but he's never really hurt anybody. You can argue that his vaccine stance maybe did as a public figure. But I think overall, in talking to his friends and the acts of kindness and generosity that he has shown with children, with his longtime friends, and those friends are loyal and they see a lot of goodness in him. And I think I bring that out in this book as well. I suspect that some of his friends saw a media guy from New York and figured I had an agenda and was looking to bury him in this book. And that was absolutely not the case. I had no agenda whatsoever. So I give you the good, the bad, and everything in between in his life, and then let the reader make the decision. I try not to make that decision for whoever buys the book. So, but I think they'll see the people I know who've read it in full have come away saying they actually like him more than they did or thought they would when they started reading the book. So, if that's a sign of anything, it's a good sign for Aaron Rodgers.
And that is Ian O'Connor, author of Belichick, a four-time New York Times best-selling author, and Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers through Mariner Books. It is out. You can get it wherever books are sold. Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Jets fans they're a resilient bunch and they're hopeful for Aaron Rodgers. And this is as deep as you're going to get on Aaron Rodgers, as thorough a portrayal as you're going to get. So thank you so much for writing this book and for coming on for this interview.
My pleasure, Mike, and it's always great to talk to a fellow Red Fox.
Go Red Foxes. Maybe this year it's the MAC title, hopefully. It's been a while.
Been long overdue. Absolutely. Take care.